Hey everyone, Digital Scriptorium here, and today I want to show off how to install Manjaro Linux step by step from start to finish. If you are unfamiliar with Manjaro Linux, it is a user-friendly Arch-based Linux distribution that simplifies the installation and maintenance of Arch Linux. It comes with a graphical installer, pre-configured desktop environments like XFCE, GNOME, or KDE, and access to the Arch user repository, making it ideal for users who want Arch's power without the steeper learning curve behind it. This guide is intended as a general use case installation of the operating system. I'm going to show off system requirements, how to create the bootable media, installing the operating system, and then giving a general rundown of the operating system itself. I won't be going into specific application usage as that's outside of the scope of my guide today. All the links I show off I will include in the description below so you can easily find them if need be. One disclaimer I just want to mention is a warning that this is an operating system install guide where I completely remove the previous operating system. As is with any operating system, you might run into unforeseen issues, so you have to go into this with an open mind that issues might spring up. Worst case, you can always attempt to install a different operating system back on the machine. If you need help, I have many different Windows and Linux guides to accomplish this. And one last thing before I begin, I also just want to mention that if you're feeling generous, to think about donating to support my channel on either Ko-Fi or Patreon. Every bit goes back into making new guides. Alright, with that all said, let's dive in. Alright, so the first thing I just want to go over real quick is just the system requirements. Now, as I had mentioned earlier, any links that I show off I will have in the description below if you want to reference them, especially as these requirements could change over time. So just as it mentions here, this is the recommended system settings rather than the minimum system settings. So you'd want 4 GB of RAM, 30 GB of hard drive space. My recommendation is to have a solid state drive if possible to keep things nice and peppy, a dual core processor, and then a high-definition HD graphics card and monitor. This is pretty much open for interpretation here, so this could be probably a machine within the last, I would say, 10 years should be acceptable for performance for this. Maybe even further out, but 10 years is probably the goal here for kind of a system. And then it mentions a broadband internet connection, which again is completely open to interpretation depending on where you are and what is technically considered a broadband internet connection, which can be all over the place depending on where you are in the world. So with that portion out of the way, let's get to downloading Manjaro's ISO image. So if we go to Manjaro's website, which once again I'll have this in the description below for you to click on the download button on the main page, and then there are going to be several images that you can choose from. So there are 3 official images, which is provided by the Manjaro team, as it mentions here. And then if you scroll down, then there's the community images, which is just as it's mentioned here, maintained by the Manjaro community members. And really all these is the desktop environment experience that you can choose from. So if you're new to Linux, there are a whole bunch of different desktop experiences that you can choose from. For instance, there's the KDE Plasma, the XFCE, the GNOME desktop experience, and then if you scroll down, there's going to be the Cinnamon desktop, the i3 window manager, and the Sway WM. And then if most people are not choosing the top 3 official images, then there's probably a good chance that you are choosing just the Cinnamon desktop. Anyhow, for the scope of this video today, I am going to be using the KDE Plasma variant. So once you've decided on the desktop experience that you want to choose from, then just click the download button, wait for it to download, and then we will continue on. In my case, I've already downloaded it. So at this point, the next thing is going to be how do we get the ISO image onto a thumb drive so that it can boot off of it and install the operating system. So we're going to use as a utility called Rufus. And if you're unfamiliar with Rufus, it is a very nice and easy to use, very low profile application, and of course, best of all, it is free. So if we scroll down to about midway on the page, you'll find the download section. It's going to say the latest releases, and you've got a number of options to choose from here. So there's the 4.6, then they've got the 4.7 beta. But basically you have the Windows x64 standard, and then there's the portable version of it, which I generally don't use the portable version just because I haven't found an actual use for it. There's a 32-bit version, aka the x86 variant. There's the Windows on ARM variant, and then just as I mentioned, there's the beta version. However, my recommendation is just download the latest production release. So we'll just choose this one, and then we'll close out of this nonsense pop-up, and then just download it, and then we will continue on. So I'm going to pop open the downloads folder, and then we can close out of the browser. So at this point, before we continue on, there's going to be one more thing we want to do. One thing I've noticed a lot recently with the Windows operating systems, Windows 10 and Windows 11, is that if Windows Defender is actually in use on your machine, the real-time protection has a habit of false flagging your operating system files as they're being added onto the thumb drive. So what basically happens is the files start getting added onto the thumb drive, and then Windows Defender starts Pac-Man eating the files up. So then you think everything's good, you go to boot off of the drive, and then you start experiencing weird things with like sluggishness, or it starts freezing, or the installation process itself just kind of freezes at a certain point and never makes it past that point. So I'm going to show real quick how to temporarily turn off the Windows Defender real-time protection so that we do not run into that issue. And like I said, this is just temporarily turning it off. We're not permanently disabling it, all that good stuff. So to do so, let's go down to Start, and then let's do a search for Windows Security. And actually, I've got it right here, so I'll click on Windows Security, and then click on Virus and Threat Protection. Next, let's go to the Virus and Threat Protection settings and click on Manage Settings, and then locate the Real-Time Protection section. So we'll just go ahead and turn this off. Click Yes for the UAC prompt, and then let's get to work with the extra magic here. If you get the pop-up in the bottom right-hand corner, we can just dismiss that. So next up, go ahead and plug in an 8GB or larger USB thumb drive. If you don't have a USB thumb drive, I will have one in the description below. Technically speaking, you could also burn this to like a DVD, or I've heard of some people throwing this onto an SD card and then booting off the SD card to get the installer to fire up. So with my USB thumb drive plugged in, I'm going to double click on Rufus, yes for the UAC prompt, and then if all goes well, we should have our thumb drive showing up at the top here. In this case, Zorin OS 17.3 was the last OS I threw on this drive, but we are going to go ahead and nuke it. So anyhow, if your USB thumb drive is not showing up here, then my recommendation is to pull it out, reseat it. If it's still not being detected, leave it in, reboot the machine, see if it's detected then. Hopefully by that point, it should be happy for you. So anyhow, next up, now that that is being detected, let's click on Select, and then hunt down where you downloaded the ISO image to, and then click on Open. In this case, we'll just click OK for the ISO hybrid image detected, and we're just leaving everything entirely up to Rufus to determine what is the best options here. And as you can see, everything is grayed out, and that's because of it having that hybrid capability that it was warning us about. I'm just going to close out of the downloads folder so that we have nothing else open except for Rufus. And my recommendation is that once we hit Start, just don't use the machine at all, just to make sure that it doesn't interfere with anything. And also, one thing I do want to just warn you on is that this is going to nuke all of the data on the thumb drive. So if for some reason you have data that you need off the thumb drive that you did not back up already, please back it up before you click on Start, because it's all going to be erased. And like I said, this is just the thumb drive, not the computer at this point. So let's click on Start, and then it's warning us that it's going to delete the data, and that's fine. We'll click OK. And then at this point, just be patient as it works the magic, and we'll continue on. All right, if all goes well, we should have a happy, ready state. If there's a pop-up that mentions that there's an error or this is red and it says failed or something of that sort, my recommendation is first double check that your real-time protection is still temporarily turned off. You'll see the little Windows shield in the bottom that will have the X on it generally if it is still turned off. The other thing you can do is just try and get the ISO to load onto the thumb drive again. It may have just been a fluke. And then if it still fails, real-time protection is in fact turned off, reboot the machine, turn real-time protection off, and try again, and hopefully that will play nice for you. Sometimes I've also seen that this is kind of the final straw for some older thumb drives, and that nuking it is the final bit of life that was left in it, and it just dies on you. So anyhow, at this point we can click on close, and next up is going to be kind of what I consider more difficult part of installing any operating system, and that is to actually get your machine to actually boot off of the thumb drive. Now, unfortunately, every make and model is usually pretty different. Even if it's the same make, it may not always be the same across the models for, say, Lenovo or HP or Dell or anything of that sort. Or if you built your machine, it can also be pretty different in comparison to a lot of manufacturers. So my recommendation is to Google your exact make and model or make and model of motherboard if you built the machine, and just figure out what key it is that you need to mash to go ahead and get it to boot off of a thumb drive. Now in my case, I already know the key, so I'm going to go ahead and reboot my machine. I'm going to leave the thumb drive in it. And also one thing I should mention at this point is that because we are going to outright nuke the operating system entirely of the machine, at least for the scope of this video, if there's any data that you need to back up, do so before you continue on so that you don't accidentally delete data that you actually needed. So anyhow, I don't have any data that needs to be backed up, so I'm going to reboot, and I will mash the special boot order key, and then we will continue on from there. I'm going to start mashing that special key for my machine, and in this case it's the F12 key. Alright, so the startup device menu or boot menu or whatever that may come up for your specific machine may look a little bit different than this, but ultimately we are looking for something that is basically referenced like here, where in this case the thumb drive is actually being seen as a USB CD-ROM, even though it's a USB thumb drive. So sometimes it will show up as USB CD-ROM, sometimes it'll show up as a USB HDD for hard disk drive. It may even just show up as USB thumb drive. So in this case, this is my USB thumb drive, so I'm going to make sure that I have it selected like so, and I'm going to hit enter, and then we should be hopefully booting off of it here. I'm just going to use the up-down keys just to stall this out. Otherwise, you have 10 seconds or so to choose in this option. And if you don't choose anything, then it starts with the default, and that is the boot with open source drivers. But I did just want to show that there are multiple options. For instance, there's a time zone configuration, and if we hit enter for this, then we can choose our time zone. And you can leave it as UTC, or you can change it. For the sake of this video, I'm going to just show off changing it. So I'm just going to select America, and then I will use the page down key, and I'll do America, New York. And then if you had a keyboard that you need to change, then you could select something in here. I'm going to just click cancel for that. And then there's also the language option, so you can choose your language in here, but I'm just going to leave mine as English US. And then really you're going to have two main options to choose from. So boot with open source drivers. So if you have like integrated graphics like Intel or AMD's integrated graphics, then you probably just want to use the open source drivers. However, especially for NVIDIA users, and that is users who have NVIDIA graphics cards, you probably want to use the boot with proprietary drivers. But for the sake of this video, I'm just going to choose boot with open source drivers, and then just be patient as it loads off of the thumb drive. And we should see the Manjaro little symbol down there and the dots that are blinking as it continues to load up for us. So at this point, it may seem like that this operating system is just running, and technically it is. This is running a live disk basically at the moment. So you could test out the operating system if you wanted to right now before actually installing it to your machine. However, the downside to this is that the performance can sometimes be lacking, and any configurations or anything that you save will not actually save through a reboot. So we're going to go through and install the operating system. So let me just click out of this. And I will just mention that my recommendation, if possible, is to plug a hardwired network cable into your machine for internet access. If that's not possible and you need to connect your live environment to the wireless, if you just go down to the little networks icon down here, left click on it, then it will show you, if you have wireless that is, it will show you the SSIDs or wireless access points and range that you can connect to. This is going to be partially blurred out so I don't show off my neighbor's information here, but you can choose these, connect it to wireless before you continue on. So anyhow, in my case, mine is connected into a hardwired network, so I'm going to continue on. So we're going to double click on the Install Manjaro Linux in the top left corner, and we'll wait for this to load up here. And basically, we're going to go through and start the whole setup process. So you have the option of choosing your language. I'm going to leave mine as American English. Click on Next once you've chosen your language you need. And again, it's going to ask you for the time zone. So I'm going to leave mine as is. However, you can click generally where you are and it will bring you to that time zone. Or you can manually change it in these drop downs as well. So I'll click on Next. So you'll have the keyboard options that you can choose from. So at the top, there's the keyboard model that you can choose from the general pool of keyboards. You can also change up your language and locales. And then there's also a little box here to where you can actually type your keys and to make sure that they actually are showing up as your proper keys. There's also a switch keyboard option that you can change up different configurations in there. But for the sake of this video, mine looks fine. I'll click on Next. You are going to have a number of options to choose from. As I had mentioned in the beginning, we are going to nuke the current hard drive completely of its data and operating system, and this is going to be the sole operating system that will be on this machine. So currently I have selected Erase Disk, and as it mentions, this will delete all data currently present on the selected storage device. There's also a Replace Partition option, and there's also the option to install alongside another operating system. Now the reason as to why I'm kind of against having dual boot machines, especially dual boot machines where you have Windows on there already and then you're trying to side load Linux on, well, unfortunately Microsoft has a very unfortunate habit of releasing Microsoft updates that just nuke your bootloader, and then you've got to rebuild your bootloader and all that good stuff. So in my opinion, it's just the easiest to just go all in and deal with it that way. One thing also just to mention is that there is also a manual partitioning option that you can choose. Now you do have a few options. For one, there's going to be the swap selection that you can choose from, and then there's also the file system that you can choose from. Now these are all file systems that you can of course feel free to research and decide which one is best for you, but generally the top two, at least from what I've seen, is the ext or extent or ext4 and then btrfs. For the sake of this video, we're just going to leave it as the ext4 or extension 4 or extended 4. Many different people call it many different things. And then for the swap option, this again is something that is open to debate online. However, I'm just going to choose swap no hibernate. A lot of people also choose swap to file. Now the swap configuration is something that is completely debatable online as well. Many people choose no swap. In my opinion, I'm against that. The three big options that are really something you should set are right here. So there's a swap with no hibernate. So if you really are not expecting the machine to go to sleep, aka maybe this is more of a desktop that you're using, then I would select swap no hibernate. If you're using a laptop and expecting it to actually hibernate, then you can do swap with hibernate, and then there's a swap to file. But for the sake of this video, because this is a desktop, I'm going to do swap no hibernate, and this is effectively creating a swap partition. So many people choose the swap file because it's not actually force allocating a section of the drive to always just be a swap partition. But in my opinion, this is just how I feel it should be. So you don't have to worry about running out of space and all that good stuff. So it's just dedicated. So anyhow, once again, you can of course research it, figure out what's best for you. But anyhow, I'm going to continue on. So I'm going to click next. And next up, it's going to ask you for your full name, so I will type that in. And then generally, it will take the first name and the first letter of the last name, I guess you could say in this case, even though this is not actually my name, but anyhow. So it's got it set as digital, so I'm just going to move that to digital. You can also choose the name of your machine or host name. So I'm going to change this up. I'll just change it to this, but of course change it to whatever name you like. And my recommendation is to type in a nice, long, secure password for this. So I will type in just something to get us by for right now. In my case, it's actually not very long. You do have the option to log in automatically without asking for the password. And then there's also the option to use the same password for the administrator account. However, my recommendation is let's go ahead and make the password for the normal user account and the administrator account to be different. And once again, this is all completely up to you on what you want to set up. So you can always feel free to research this section for your recommended workflows and whatnot. But here we'll click next. It's going to ask you basically what office suite you want, or if you don't want an office suite. So there's the no office suite, LibreOffice, and then free office. So once again, this is completely up to you. I'm going to choose LibreOffice, at least for this video. So we'll click next. Now it's just giving us a general overview of the things that we have currently selected. So at this point, this is another warning that if you have not backed up the data on your machine that you're going to nuke and you need that data, back it up now by just clicking cancel, reboot the machine, back up the data, and then go back through these steps. But anyhow, I do not have any data that I need, so I'm going to click on install. And then this is basically the warning that says that you cannot undo these changes. So I'm going to click install now. And then we will let this crunch. And if you want to see something other than the little slideshow that it shows, and you want to see what's actually happening in the terminal side of things, you can click the toggle log and you can watch what's happening here. So anyhow, once this is done, we will continue on in the video. So at this point, hopefully we get the all done screen and that no errors came up. Once again, if you do get any errors during the install process, you can always reboot the machine, try it again. Maybe it was a fluke, or it could be another case of was real-time protection temporarily disabled and were files Pac-Manned as they were being loaded onto the thumb drive using Rufus. So a few things that could go wrong at this point. If for some reason it does keep failing, then I would say just rebuild the USB thumb drive, or potentially even switch thumb drives and see if a different one acts better than the one that you did use. But anyhow, at this point, let's go ahead and click on restart now, and then let's click on done. And then once we get to the post screen or the model screen, let's pull the thumb drive just to make sure it doesn't start booting off of the thumb drive on us. All right, so we should be at the login screen. So there are a few different options that you do have at the login screen. One is, of course, typing in your password to actually log in. There is the sleep option. There's a restart button, shutdown, and other. And if you click on other, then it gives you basically a method to type in a different username and password in this section. Anyhow, I'm just going to leave it as a list user, and then I'm going to type in my password and hit enter, and we'll wait for it to fully start up for us. And then you can feel free to take a look at the Welcome to Manjaro stuff, all the documentation and what have you. Definitely a lot of stuff to choose from. If you're all set with this, then just toggle off the launch at start, and then we can close out of it. Now you may have seen the pop-up very briefly that mentioned that there are some updates. Before we continue, let's go ahead and run those updates. So I'm going to click on the red shield, and then you can feel free to peruse through everything that is queued up for updates. And as you can see, there's the current version and then the version it's going to jump to kind of stuff. So anyhow, for security reasons and bug fixes and performance issues getting fixed and all that good stuff, let's click on apply, and then it's going to ask you for the password. So type in your password here, hit enter, and then just be patient as this downloads. And then it is mentioning that it's going to remove some stuff, and then here's the stuff that's going to get installed. So you can peruse that if you scroll along. We'll click on apply, and then just be patient as it downloads and installs all of this. All right, so now it's mentioning a restart is required for changes to take effect. Let's restart now so that we can have it all updated and fresh and we can continue on. All right, and let's log back in. All right, so at this point, the operating system is loaded on. We did the updates, and so technically speaking, it's good to go. If you want to continue watching this video, I'm going to go through a basic rundown of the desktop environment that you're going to see for KDE. So I will continue on with that now. One thing I'm going to do real quick before we dive into the general overview at this point is I'm going to right click on the background and I'm just going to select display configuration. And this is just because my video capture device is not set to the proper resolution right now. So I'm going to try and make this nice and crisp. So I'm going to set to 1080. Generally, your machine probably automatically detected it, so you probably don't have to do this. But just in case, if your resolution is off from the get-go, you can just follow those steps to change that up. I'm going to click out of that for right now. So in the bottom right-hand corner is going to be your date and time. And if you left-click on it, it's going to pop up with a calendar. And you can choose days, months, years, and then you can toggle between different months with these little arrows here. You can also pin it so that it stays open. We can unpin it. And then if you click on the little kind of slider icon here, which is the configurations, then this pops up where you can change up the appearance. You can change calendar settings, time zone settings, keyboard shortcuts, and there's an about section that just mentions the general about information on the digital clock. We'll click cancel for that. Next up to the left of that is going to be your show hidden icons section. So you've got notifications, you've got disks and devices. So if there was a USB thumb drive or something plugged in, then you can click on that and see what you've got connected. There's the KDE Connect where you can manage connected devices. There's the Manjaro Settings Manager. There's display configuration, and then there's power management that you can choose from. We'll go into a lot of this stuff more in detail when we get to the settings section. So I'm just going to click out of that for right now. However, to the left of that is going to be your network options, as I had shown off earlier before we started digging into actually installing the operating system. So of course, if you have a wired connection, it's going to show up here. And then if you do have a wireless card in your machine, then you will see your wireless access points or SSIDs that are within range that you can potentially connect to. There's also a search feature. There's a hotspot feature. There's an airplane mode feature. And then if you click in the little slider again, aka the settings, then it will come up with the settings options that you can choose from. And you can take a peek at all the different options that you may be able to choose from in this section. I'm just going to close out of that for right now. Next up to the left of that is going to be your screen brightness option. So if you click this, then you can click on the enable and configure, and then you can feel free to configure any switching times. So you can configure whatever settings you may want here if you want to adjust your blue filters and all that good stuff. And this does open up the colors and themes settings, which again, we will get to later on in the video. So I'll close out of this. And then next up on the left is the volume options. So there's going to be your speaker options. And then if you do have a microphone, you can configure it here. And if you click on the little stack icon, I guess you can call it, then you can change up some configurations here. And the same goes for your speakers. And then there's also an applications section. So if any applications are actually playing or recording audio, you would see them here. And then there's also a raise maximum volume option that you can choose from down here. Again, you can pin this if you wanted to keep it open. You can configure audio devices by clicking in this, which gets us into the general settings screen again. There's all sorts of stuff you can configure in here. And then going back to the volume settings real quick, there's also the little stack icon, which gives you more options that you can choose from here to force mute and show virtual devices and what have you. So we'll click out of that. And then next up is the shield icon, and this is your system update utility of sorts, which is what we kicked off earlier. However, you can take a look at installed applications and any pending updates. You can click refresh and it will check for updates, but we'll close out of that. Next up is going to be the desktop options that you can choose from here. And so if you actually hover over them, So for instance, the top one is showing desktop 1, bottom one is showing desktop 2. So you can actually, on the fly, flip between your desktops. And when I say desktops, I mean you can potentially have multiple applications open between different desktops. You may have files on the desktop for each specific desktop. So I could toss something on desktop 1, but then I jump to desktop 2, and it may have different files that I have stashed on desktop 2. But anyhow, I'll go back to desktop 1. And then to the left of that is going to be peek at desktop. And this really comes in handy. For instance, I'll just open up Firefox, the web browser that is included by default. And then I'm just going to double click in the bar at the top. But if I click on peek at desktop, it brings you to the desktop, but the application is still actually running. You can click stop peeking and it'll bring us right back to the application. We'll close out of Firefox for right now. And then next up on the furthest left-hand side, let's click on the application launcher. People who are used to Windows, this would be basically your start menu. So there's the favorite section, which is really coming up with just the applications that you've last accessed, or you can kind of consider this your recent section. There's the all applications, which literally is every single application you have on your machine. And then it starts breaking the applications down into kind of subcategories. So there's a development category, education, graphics, help, internet, multimedia, office apps, the system options, utilities. So there's a number of stuff to check out in that portion. And then you do have a search option, and you can also do a Control F as it mentions with me hovering over that. And then one thing just to mention is it shows your full name before I hover over, and then it shows the actual user and then your host name. And then once again, there is a configure section here. So you can click on this, you can configure your application launcher if you wanted to. We'll click cancel for this, and we'll go back to the application launcher. And then at the bottom is going to be kind of your options that you can choose from. So by default, it's popping open applications, but then there's places that you can choose, and that comes with its own little subcategories that you can take a gander at. So computer, history, and frequently used. And then there is the sleep option, hibernate, restart, and shut down. And then there is also this little icon which you can click, which is the leave option, and it does give you the option to lock, log out, save the session, and switch a user. And then to the right of that is going to be Dolphin, or the file manager. So we click in this, and this is going to be your file explorer per se. So you've got home, desktop, documents, downloads, music, pictures, videos, trash if you actually had anything in your trash. And then there's also the network option. So it shows network devices. And one thing you can do is you can add like a network folder and stuff like that. And there's recent files, recent locations. And then if you click on this, this is going to bring you into the root directory of your machine. If you also notice, it may be a little bit easier if I click into, say, recent locations, it kind of actually shows the overall disk usage of your hard drive. So in my case, 8% is being used, and it may be a little difficult to kind of see in the video, but there is a tiny little area here of kind of a teal color that shows the space that's being eaten up. So we'll close out of that. And then next up is going to be your console or terminal. So this is everything you expect out of a terminal that you can take a gander at if you need to run any terminal commands in here. And there's a number of different things like being able to paste, copy, find. You can do new tabs, you can split the view. And then there's also the extra options that you can choose over on the right hand side. And here we'll close out of that. Next up is Firefox, which I temporarily opened to show off the peek to desktop option. But anyhow, it is the default browser that comes bundled with Manjaro. If it's something you don't want to use, you can always install a different browser of your choosing, and you could always remove Firefox as well. So I'm going to go ahead and close out of that. And then to the right of that is going to be add and remove software. So again, this is basically just opening up the system update sort of section, but it's on the browse category. So you can feel free to go through and remove an application if you don't want it. So for instance, as I was just mentioning, if you wanted a different web browser and you want to now get rid of Firefox, well, you can go ahead and select it. If you wanted to, you can click remove, or you can hit the little trash can here and go through the process of removing it that way. So we'll close out of that. And then on the desktop, if you right click, just as I did previously to get to display configuration, there's the desktop and wallpaper option you can choose, and we can pop this open to expand it out. I'll just go ahead and choose the path one down there. It looks interesting. We'll click apply. And then on the left-hand side, you have mouse actions, location, icons, filter, and about stuff you can take a gander at. I'll click cancel now that that's been applied. So at least we've got something different. And then if we right click on the background again, once again, there's the display configuration as I went over previously. There is create new. So for instance, you can create a new folder, text file, empty file, HTML file. And then depending on what Office app you selected, or if you didn't select an Office app, then these wouldn't show up. However, LibreOffice stuff shows up here. However, if you went with the other Office application, then it will also show up in this section, I believe. And then there's link to location, link to file or directory, and link to application. And then next up is the icons. So you can sort them, you can change up their size, you can arrange them, you can align them, you can show previews, you can lock them. If you copied something, you can paste it. If you changed something, you can undo it. And then there's also an enter edit mode, which I won't go into. So with that out of the way, let's take a look at the settings that I kept until the very last portions. So let's go back into the application launcher, and then let's take a peek at system settings, which is probably going to show up in your favorites at this point if you've been clicking through kind of what I've been doing. Otherwise, just go to system, and then scroll down and go to system settings, or you could also do a search for it. So we'll click into system settings. Let me maximize this. So at the very top is the quick settings option. And actually, I should mention on top of that is the search feature. So you can go ahead and search in here for something you may want to find for a configuration. You do have the option for themes. I'm just going to change mine to make sure it's on the breathe dark configuration. And then I just hit apply and it changed it up for me here. However, if you want the breathe light, then you can always leave that on. And there's all sorts of other options you can kind of choose in here. And as it mentions, it's the most used pages options that you can take a peek at. However, we're going to dive into those as we crunch along going down here. So next up is the mouse and touchpad options. So you can change up mouse options, touchpad options if you actually have a touchpad. In my case, this is a desktop, so it didn't actually find a touchpad. However, if you've got a laptop, chances are it should hopefully find it for you. There's the screen edges configuration that you can take a peek at if you need to adjust anything in here. Next up is the keyboard options. So you can feel free to change up your keyboard options if you maybe accidentally chose the wrong ones during the setup process, or you changed out your keyboard to something else. You can feel free to fine tune it here. There's also shortcuts that you can take a gander at. And then there's touchscreen. So if I actually had a touchscreen, then I could dive into this a little bit more. However, I do not. There's the multimedia options. So for instance, it's got audio CD configurations, CDDB retrieval. So things you can take a peek at there. There's the game controller options, which I don't have a game controller attached. And then there's the sound options, which is basically what we dug into earlier when we were taking a gander at it in the bottom right hand corner. There's display and monitor. Once again, it's showing the display configuration that I adjusted previously. And there's compositor configurations, there's gamma configurations if you need to fine tune any of that. Next up is the accessibility options. So there's a system bell configuration, modifier keys, keyboard filters, mouse navigation, activation shortcuts, a screen reader. In this case, it doesn't have one installed. And then there's the color blindness correction options that you can choose from. And then below that is going to be Bluetooth. If I had a Bluetooth controller, then it would show up here with some options. and it would also allow you to add and remove Bluetooth devices. Next up is disks and camera. So there's device actions, and this is basically in regards to plugging portable media and stuff like that in, USB thumb drives, CD drives, stuff like that. And it's basically saying what action should this take if those are plugged in. You can also add options, you can edit them. There's device auto mount configurations that you can take a peek at, digital camera stuff, and then below this is going to be Thunderbolt. In my case, I don't have a Thunderbolt controller in this machine, so it's not going to show up here. There's the KDE Connect, which is a feature, for instance, with Android devices and iPhones. You can kind of connect them to the machine. Below that is going to be your printers. So if you added any printers, they would show up here, or if you need to add a printer, you can click on the add button at the top here, and that will get you in the right place for that. Just going to scroll down a little bit here. And then the next one going down is going to start us in the networking section. So this is just as I took a quick peek at before. So there's Wi-Fi and network configurations. You can add, you can remove, you can change up all sorts of configurations here if you needed to, and you can also take a peek at information under those tabs. There's proxy configurations, connection preferences, and then next up is going to be online accounts. So if you do want to add any online accounts, you can click on Add Account, and then you can select which account you want to choose from to add it onto the machine. And then next up is going to be wallpaper, which is what we've already gone through, and then colors and themes. So there's all sorts of actually different themes you can choose from here. And then there's colors, night light, application styles, plasma style, window decorations, icons, cursors, system sounds, splash screen, login screen, aka the SDDM. So you can change up what that looks like. Boot splash screen you can change up. And then there's the text and fonts. So there's fonts, and then there's font management that you can take a gander at. And below that is default applications. So this is basically what is going to happen if you, for instance, need to choose something that's going to activate the web browser or email client, phone numbers, image viewer, music player, video player, text editor, PDF viewer, file manager, terminal emulator, archive manager, and maps. So anyhow, if you change any of these up, for instance, video player, you wanted something different and you had something different, you can choose it. Image viewer, again, you could choose between these two options that are already installed. Web browser, if you had another web browser, for instance, you can change that up. So again, it's just how it reacts to specific things. So if you click on an image, it's going to open Gwen View, and then if you click on music file or something, it's going to open in Elisa or VLC Media if you chose it. That's the general gist of that. There's also the file associations that you can change up. You can expand them out, and you can take a look at what specific application file types and what have you may be bound to what application. If you click on it, you can fine tune it here. And then there's going to be the notifications options. So you can take a peek at these. There's also the options up at the top to get into system notifications and application settings. And next one down is going to be window management. So there's all sorts of custom configurations you can set. You've got all sorts of different tabs at the top for window behavior, task switcher, desktop effects, window rules, Quinn scripts, virtual desktops, lots of stuff to take a gander at there. Activities, you can basically create new and set some stuff up. That can be some research you can dive into. Workspace, for instance, general behavior. You've got a few options you can change up within here. Search, so there's file search, and then there's plasma search options. And then next up is screen locking. So you have the screen locking options, and then you can configure the appearance. KDE wallet, you can take a peek at that. And then there's also access control settings. Recent files, if I opened any recent files, they're going to show up in here. And then you can also configure how you want the history to react. There's user feedback that you can take a peek at. Region and language, if you need to modify any of this. Spell check, if you wanted to change up any of your spell check options. Date and time, discard for this. And again, it has your calendar, has the clock, There's the time zone options you can choose. And then below that is the About This System. So this is giving the general rundown of the software and operating system stuff at the top. And there's the hardware information below. There is also the option to show more system information, and you can also copy details. And then below that is power management. So this is your power options that you can choose from. There's also an advanced power settings option you can choose. However, one thing I just want to mention is that, for instance, if you have a desktop, you may want it to not sleep. And in that case, you can select when inactive and just select do nothing. And it's just warning that obviously it's going to use higher energy consumption because the machine isn't going to go to sleep when it's idle. So I'm just going to click apply. And there's all sorts of other options you can feel free to change up in here. And then under that is going to be users. So in this case, you can change up the user accounts. You can also add a new account if you wanted to on here. And then below that is going to be auto start. And this is where you can basically add things in here to actually auto start automatically when you log in. And then below that is going to be session. So you have desktop session configurations. And then you also have a locations configuration that you can choose from here. So that's all you need to do to get Manjaro Linux installed on a machine. If you found this video to be useful, please like it and subscribe to my channel to keep up with the latest video happenings. I also invite you to check out my channel if you haven't already, as it has many interesting guides and many more to come. Anyhow, until next time, take it easy.